But father, you must provide the entire dowry by next week. I will not have my daughter marry a penniless man.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, everything is perfectly fine.
Are you sure? How could you do this to me? I trusted you with everything. And you come here and lie.
It's not true.
Don't you dare deny it.
The first time my father-in-law asked me for half of my salary, he smiled while he said it. That smile is the part I still cannot forget. Not the words, the smile. Because a man who is about to destroy your peace does not frown at you. He smiles so that by the time you understand what he has done, you will already be calling it a misunderstanding. My name is Nonso, and for 2 years I paid a man I called Papa every single month. Not because I owed him anything, but because he told me that if I refused, he would make sure my marriage did not survive the year. I want you to sit down properly for this one because it does not end where you think it ends. Before you scroll away, subscribe to this channel because the twist in this story is not the one you are already guessing in your head. Trust me, you are wrong. And by the time I tell you exactly what my wife did to end it at her own cousin's wedding in front of nearly 60 relatives, you will understand why I say this is not a story about a wicked old man stealing from his son-in-law. It is a story about a secret so old and so heavy that it nearly crushed 3 different marriages at once, and only one brave woman standing up at exactly the right moment was able to stop it. Let me start from the beginning. I met Ijeoma at a wedding in Enugu, of all places. Not my wedding, not her wedding, somebody else's wedding. A cousin of mine who I am not even close to. But you know how it is in our culture. A wedding invitation from a distant cousin can still summon the whole extended family, like a village meeting. I was standing near the drinks table pretending to be interested in small chops when I saw her laughing with her friends, and something about the way she threw her head back when she laughed made me forget the puff-puff in my hand. I'm not going to lie to you and say it was some grand romantic story written by God himself in the stars. It was simple. I liked her, she liked me, we exchanged numbers. 6 months later, we were officially dating. 2 years after that, I knelt down in her family's compound in Nsukka and asked her father for her hand in marriage. Her father's name was Chief Okoli, and I want you to understand something about Chief Okoli before this story continues, because everything that happened later makes no sense unless you understand this man first. Chief Okoli was not a poor man, and he was not exactly a rich man either. He was the kind of man who had once been comfortable, a man who had built a small transport business in the 80s, owned 2 commercial buses that plied the Nsukka to Enugu route, and used that money to send his 3 children to good schools, to build a modest bungalow with a gate that had his chieftaincy title boldly painted on it, and to become somebody people greeted first at village meetings. But by the time I met him, the buses were gone. Both of them. Sold, though nobody in the family ever said exactly why, or when, or to whom. All anybody said, whenever the topic came close to the surface, was that business had not been kind to Papa in recent years. I didn't think much of it at the time. Many businesses fail in this country. I assumed it was simply bad luck, the kind that visits every trader eventually. When I asked for Ijeoma's hand, Chief Okoli welcomed me with open arms. He called me my son before the introduction ceremony had even finished. He told everyone present that he had prayed for a man exactly like me. Hardworking, humble, a civil engineer with a steady salary from a construction firm in Enugu, a man who did not smoke, did not drink excessively, and greeted elders properly. He said all of this with such warmth that my mother, sitting beside me, wept with joy. I remember thinking, this is a man who truly loves his daughter and wants the best for her. I was not wrong about that, but I was not entirely right either. And that's the whole tragedy of this story. A man can love his daughter and still nearly destroy her marriage because love, when it is mixed with fear and shame, does not behave the way love is supposed to behave. Let me tell you a little more about those 18 months because they matter later, even though they seemed at the time like the most ordinary stretch of courtship in the world. I was renting a small, self-contained apartment in Enugu then, the kind with a shared generator and a landlord who knocked on your door every first of the month like clockwork. Ijeoma was still living with her parents in Suka, teaching junior secondary school students on weekdays and coming to visit me every other weekend, always with her elder sister trailing as a chaperone, because Chief Okoli, despite everything I would later learn about him, was strict about propriety in a way that impressed my own mother deeply. Mama Ngozi, his wife, was quieter, gentler, the kind of woman she fed you until you could not move and then apologized for not cooking enough. I liked that household. I felt safe there. That feeling of safety is exactly what made everything that came later so disorienting, because betrayal from a stranger is painful, but betrayal from a place you once called safe cut in a completely different way. Ijeoma and I got married in a modest but beautiful ceremony 18 months after our traditional engagement. She wore white, I wore a simple black suit, and Chief Okoli danced so hard at the reception that his agbada nearly came undone at the shoulder. Everybody laughed. Everybody clapped. Nobody, not me, not my new wife, not a single soul in that hall could have imagined what would begin exactly 4 months later on a Sunday evening when Chief Okoli called me on the phone and asked me to come and see him alone without Ijeoma present. I want you to pause and think about that request. Alone, without his own daughter present. If a father wants to discuss family matters, the natural thing is to gather everyone. But Chief Okoli specifically wanted me alone. And being a young husband who still respected his father-in-law deeply, I did not question it. I drove to Nsukka the following Saturday, sat across from him in his small sitting room with the ceiling fan clicking unevenly above us, and waited for whatever fatherly advice he was about to give me about marriage. He did not give me advice about marriage. He asked me for 400,000 naira every month. I laughed at first because I genuinely thought he was joking. Chief Okoli did not laugh with me. He sat there, his face suddenly serious in a way I had never seen from him, and repeated the number slowly as if I had misheard him the first time. 400,000 naira every month, starting immediately. I told him as gently as I could that my salary at the time was 650,000 naira, and that giving him 400,000 would leave me barely enough to run my own household, pay rent, and support my new wife. I told him it was simply not possible. That was when he said the words that I would replay in my head for the next 2 years of my life. He said, "Nonso, my son, I am not asking you, I am telling you because I love my daughter and I do not want anything bad to happen to this marriage." And he smiled. That smile. I asked him what he meant by anything bad. He did not answer directly. Instead, he began speaking in circles, the way our elders do when they want you to fill in the blanks yourself instead of accusing them outright of threatening you. He talked about how marriages in our family had a history of problems. He mentioned almost casually that Ijeoma's cousin's marriage had ended in a scandal 3 years earlier, something about the wife's family exposing certain things to the husband's people, and how such exposure could destroy a man's reputation permanently in our community, could make his own mother unable to hold her head up at church anymore. He never once said, "If you don't pay me, I will destroy your marriage." He did not need to say it that plainly. The threat was folded so neatly inside his words that if I repeated the conversation to anyone else, it would have sounded like nothing at all, just an old man rambling about family history. But I understood him perfectly. I understood that Ijeoma Okoli was telling me, in the softest word possible, that he had something or knew something or could manufacture something that would make my new marriage impossible to survive if I refused to pay him. Let me take you deeper into that first meeting because the details matter. When he first said 400,000 naira, he did not shout it. He said it the way you would mention the price of rice in the market, casually, as though it were the most natural request for a father-in-law to make 4 months into his daughter's marriage. When he hesitated, he leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees, and told me a story about a neighbor of his, a man named Mazieze, whose sons-in-law had disrespected the family early in the marriage by refusing to support them financially, and how that marriage had mysteriously collapsed within 2 years, the wife returning to her father's house with 2 children, and no explanation anyone in the community fully believed. He never once said, "If you don't pay me, I will destroy your marriage." He did not need to say that plainly. The threat was folded so neatly inside his words that if I repeated the conversation to anyone else, it would have sounded like nothing at all, just an old man rambling about family history. But I understood him perfectly. I understood that Ijeoma Okoli was telling me, in the softest word possible, that he had something or knew something or could manufacture something that would make my new marriage impossible to survive if I refused to pay him. To reason with him, I told him I respected him deeply, that I intended to support the family in whatever reasonable way I could, the way any good son-in-law supports his wife's parents. A monthly stipend here, help with medical bills there, generous gifts during festive periods. 400,000 naira was not support. It was closer to half my income, an amount that would have made it impossible for Ijeoma and I to save for the things young couples save for: a car, a home of our own, children's school fees years down the line. I said all of this as respectfully as I knew how. Chief Okoli listened patiently, nodding along as if genuinely considering my point, and then repeated almost word for word his earlier statement about protecting the marriage. It was in that repetition, that exact unwavering repetition, that I understood negotiation would only get me so far. This was not a discussion. It was a demand wearing the costume of a discussion. I left his house that evening shaking. I did not tell Ijeoma. I told myself I would handle it quietly, as the man of my new household, the way my own father would have handled it. I negotiated with Chief Okoli over 3 visits, and eventually we settled on 250,000 naira a month. Not 400, but still an amount that crushed the financial plans Ijeoma and I had made for our first year of marriage. I told my wife that I was helping her parents with some family expenses. She believed me, because why would she not? Fathers helping their married daughters and married daughters occasionally sending money back home is completely normal in our culture. What was not normal was the amount, the secrecy, and the fear underneath it. I want to walk you through what those 8 months actually looked like from the inside, because I paid faithfully makes it sound simple, and there was nothing simple about it. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from living a double life inside your own marriage, smiling at breakfast while doing silent arithmetic in your head, calculating how many days remained until the next transfer, how much overtime you would need to survive the gap. I started taking on structural consulting jobs on weekends, small private projects, a borehole foundation here, a fence wall assessment there, anything that paid cash quickly. I stopped attending my old university classmates' monthly hangout, telling them I was too busy with work, when the truth was I could no longer afford the fuel to drive across town, let alone the drinks once I arrived. My own mother noticed the weight I was losing and blamed it on city stress, rubbing bitterleaf soup into my hands every time I visited her in Awuka, insisting I was not eating properly. I let her believe that because the real explanation felt too shameful to say out loud, even to my own mother, that I was quietly funding a debt I had never agreed to protect a threat I did not fully understand. For the first 8 months, I paid faithfully. I transferred the money on the last Friday of every month, directly into Chief Okoli's personal account, and every single time I felt something inside me shrink a little smaller. I stopped buying new clothes. I told Ijeoma we should postpone the small honeymoon trip we had planned to Calabar. I picked up extra structural consulting jobs on weekends, exhausting myself so thoroughly that I began falling asleep at dinner, and Ijeoma, bless her, thought I was simply overworking myself out of ambition. She would rub my shoulders and tell me to slow down, that we had enough, that she did not marry me for money but for peace. I would smile at her and say nothing, because how do you tell your new wife that her own father is quietly bleeding your marriage dry, using her own happiness as the weapon? Something else was happening during those 8 months that I did not notice at the time, but which I now understand was the second layer of this entire story, the layer underneath the layer I thought I was living in. Chief Okoli was not living large with the money I was sending him. That was the strange part. If a man is extorting his son-in-law for 250,000 naira every month, you would expect to see evidence of it. A new car, renovations to the house, expensive clothes, something. There was nothing. Chief Okoli's bungalow remained exactly as modest as it had always been. He still wore the same 3 agbadas he rotated for special occasions. He still drove the same aging Toyota Camry with the cracked side mirror he had refused to fix for years. I noticed this, vaguely, during visits, but I did not think deeply about it. I assumed, foolishly, that perhaps he was simply saving the money, or that old men like him were naturally frugal regardless of how much cash passed through their hands. The truth, when it eventually surfaced, was far darker than frugality. It was Ijeoma who found the first thread, 9 months into our marriage, completely by accident. She had gone to visit her mother, Mama Ngozi, in Nusuka for a weekend, something she did once every month or two, and while helping her mother clean out an old cupboard in the back room, she found a stack of documents tucked inside a faded Ghana Moscow bag. Old receipts, a rent agreement, and something that made her stomach turn cold. A letter typed and signed from a man named Chief Igwe, dated almost 5 years earlier. The letter was short. It reminded Chief Okoli of an outstanding debt of 11 million naira and stated, in language that was polite on the surface but unmistakably threatening underneath, that certain matters discussed would be brought to the attention of the appropriate persons if the debt was not settled within a reasonable time. Before I tell you what she did with that letter, I need to tell you what almost stopped her from finding it at all, because it very nearly did not happen. Mama Ngozi had asked Ijeoma to help sort through that cupboard for a completely unrelated reason. She wanted to donate old wrappers and fabric to the Church Women's Fellowship before the Harvest Bazaar, and the Ghana Must Go bag containing those documents had simply been shoved into the same corner years earlier and forgotten. Ijeoma nearly left the bag untouched entirely. It was her mother who, almost as an afterthought, said, "Just check inside that one too, in case there is anything useful," never imagining what her own daughter would find inside it. Sometimes, the truth hides not because anyone is clever enough to bury it perfectly, but simply because life is busy and old fears get pushed into corners and forgotten, until someone, by accident, goes looking for fabric and finds a debt instead. Ijeoma did not understand what she was reading at first. She assumed it was old, resolved, a closed chapter from the transport business years. She almost put it back without a second thought. But something, call it a wife's instinct, call it the quiet unease that had been building in her for months without a name, made her fold the letter and slip it into her bag instead. She did not mention it to her mother. She brought it home to me that same night, sat across from me at our small dining table, and asked me with a directness that startled me, "Nonso, do you know anything about 11 million naira that my father owes someone called Chief Igwe?" I want you to understand what happened inside me in that moment. 2 things happened at once. The first was relief, sharp and immediate, because for the first time in 9 months, I was not the only one carrying a piece of this secret. The second was terror, because I suddenly understood with total clarity that the 250,000 naira I had been sending every month was not going toward Chief Okoli's comfort. It was going somewhere else entirely. It was going toward 11 million naira that I had never been told about. I told Ijeoma everything that night, all of it. The phone call, the visit alone, the 400,000 naira demand, the negotiated 250,000 naira, the veiled threats about family scandal, all 8 months of silent payments I had made without telling her. I watched my wife's face change from confusion to disbelief to something I had never seen on her before, a kind of quiet, controlled fury that frightened me more than shouting would have. She did not cry, she did not raise her voice, she simply asked me, very calmly, "Why didn't you tell me?" And I did not have a good answer for her, because the truth was embarrassing. I had been protecting my own pride as much as I had been protecting our marriage. I had not wanted my wife to know that her father had trapped me, had made me feel small and powerless in my own home, barely months into being a married man. Before we go further, if you have not already tapped that subscribe button, this is the moment to do it, because everything that happened after that night moved faster and cut deeper than anything before it, and you will want to be here for the rest of it. I need to describe that night properly, because it changed the shape of our marriage before the bigger truth had even fully surfaced. Ijeoma did not sleep that night, neither did I. We sat at that small dining table until almost 2 a.m, the letter from Chief Igwe lying flat between us like evidence in a courtroom, and we asked each other questions neither of us could answer. Who was Chief Igwe? What was the full 11 million naira for? Was this an old debt, a new one, or something still growing? Ijeoma kept returning to one detail that disturbed her more than anything else: the date on the letter. It was almost 5 years old, which meant her father had been carrying this secret and possibly making secret payments toward it long before I had even met the family, long before he had asked me for a single naira. That realization frightened her in a way I had not expected. It was not only about the money anymore. It was about how long her father had been living a lie inside his own home, sitting across from his wife and children at dinner every evening while carrying something none of them knew existed. She called her mother the next morning, careful, deliberate, choosing her words the way you choose your footing on a wet staircase. She did not mention the letter directly. She simply asked in a roundabout way whether Papa had ever had any old business troubles she should know about. Mama Ngozi's answer was immediate and firm. "My daughter, you know that your father does not discuss business with me," delivered with the practiced ease of a woman who had learned over decades of marriage exactly which doors in her father's life she was permitted to open and which ones she was not. That answer told Ijeoma almost as much as the letter had. Her mother was not lying to protect a secret she knew. Her mother genuinely did not know. Whatever Chief Okoli was carrying, he was carrying it entirely alone and had been for years. That was the midpoint of everything, the night the second layer of this mystery cracked open. But we still did not understand the third layer, the deepest one, the one that would explain why a respectable chieftaincy title-holding man like Okoli would allow himself to be blackmailed by someone named Chief Igwe for 11 million naira in the first place. That answer took us another 3 months to uncover, and it came from the last person either of us expected, Ijeoma's younger brother, Kelechi. Before you continue, if this story is gripping you the way I think it is, tap that subscribe button now, because what Kelechi told us that night changed everything I believed about my father-in-law, and it is not the villain reveal you are expecting. Kelechi was 26 at the time, the last born, the one everyone in the family still treated as a boy, even though he had finished his master's degree in Port Harcourt and was working with an oil servicing company. Kelechi had always been closer to his father than the 2 daughters, the kind of closeness that comes from being the only son, from being taken along on business trips as a child while the girls stayed home. Ijeoma called him one evening, weeks after the Chief Igwe letter had surfaced, and simply asked him, point blank, whether he knew anything about their father owing money to a man called Igwe. There was a long silence on the phone. Then Kelechi said, "Sister, sit down first." Kelechi did not want to talk on the phone. He insisted on driving down from Port Harcourt himself, showing up at our flat in Enugu on a Friday night with a small overnight bag and a face that already looked like a man preparing to confess something. We made him tea, though he barely touched it. He sat on our small couch, rubbing his palms together for almost a full minute before he finally spoke. And when he did, his voice was lower than I had ever heard it, stripped of the easy confidence he usually carried as the family's only son. "I found out by accident too," he began. 3 years ago. I was home for Christmas and Papa asked me to help him carry some files to the bank because his back was hurting him. One of the files fell open in the car. I saw a name, Chief Igwe, and figures that did not make sense to me at the time. I asked him about it, foolishly, right there in the car, thinking it was nothing. He nearly swerved off the road. That was when I knew it was something serious. He made me swear that same night on our grandfather's name never to mention it to you or to Mama. He told me it was old business already being handled and that bringing it into the open would only bring shame the family did not deserve. I was 23. I believed him. I have carried that secret for 3 years, sister, and I am sorry. I am so sorry. What Kelechi told us was this. 15 years earlier, when Chief Okoli's transport business was still thriving, he had been elected treasurer of a cooperative thrift society, a group of about 40 traders and businessmen who pooled their monthly contributions together, each member taking turns to collect the lump sum for personal investment, a common practice in many Nigerian communities. Chief Okoli, trusted implicitly because of his standing in the community, had access to the cooperative's central account. In his 3rd year as treasurer, tempted by what he believed was a guaranteed opportunity, he had quietly borrowed a significant portion of the cooperative's pooled funds without informing the other members to invest in a haulage contract with a construction company expanding a federal road project. He fully intended to return the money before anyone noticed, with profit to spare. The contract collapsed. The construction company he had partnered with disappeared with both his personal capital and the cooperative funds he had diverted, swallowed into one of those endless Nigerian stories of a business deal gone wrong, of promises that turned to dust the moment the ink dried. Chief Okoli was left holding a hole in the cooperative's account that, with accumulated obligations and the interest the other members expected on their pooled savings, eventually grew to over 11 million naira. He sold both of his bosses, trying to quietly cover the shortfall bit by bit before anyone discovered it. It was not enough. And the one man in that cooperative who eventually pieced together what had happened, a sharp, patient, and quietly ruthless businessman called Chief Igwe, who had personally lost nearly 2 million naira of his own contributions in the scheme, decided not to expose Chief Okoli publicly. Instead, Chief Igwe made him a private offer: pay back the full 11 million naira quietly on a schedule, plus what he called compensation for his silence and patience. Or Chief Igwe would report the entire matter to the cooperative's full membership, the police, and most devastating of all in a small, tightly knit community like theirs, the church and the traditional council, guaranteeing that Chief Okoli's name would never recover from the shame. Kelechi explained slowly, piecing together fragments he had gathered over 3 years of quiet, careful listening, a phone call overheard here, a bank statement glimpsed there, a tense conversation between his parents he was never meant to witness. That the cooperative thrift society his father had once managed was called Umwada Progressive Traders Union, a group that still existed, still met monthly, though Chief Okoli quietly stopped attending years earlier, always with an excuse about his knees or his blood pressure. Chief Igwe had once been Chief Okoli's closest friend within that union, the two of them having grown up in the same compound as boys, which made the betrayal, when it happened, sting on a level far beyond ordinary business. Kelechi believed his father's continued silence was not stubbornness, but a very specific, very old kind of fear. The fear of a proud man who had spent his entire life being the one people came to for help, the one who could fix things, the one who could be trusted, and who could not bear the thought of becoming, in his final years, the man an entire community pitied. Kelechi told us that their father had been paying Chief Igwe in secret for years, first from what remained of the transport business proceeds, then from smaller side hustles, then from wherever he could find it. Kelechi believed, and I believe he was right, that Chief Okoli's demand from me was not born from pure greed at all. It was born from pure desperation and terror. Terror of a shame so complete that it would not only destroy his own name, but would follow his 3 children for the rest of their lives in a community where sins like this are never truly forgotten, only whispered about at every subsequent wedding, funeral, and naming ceremony for the next 30 years. There is one more piece of that night with Kelechi that I have to tell you, because it shifted something in me permanently. Before he left our flat that night, close to midnight, he turned to me at the door and said something I did not expect from a man 9 years younger than me. He said, "Nonso, I know you probably hate my father right now, and honestly, you have every right to, but I need you to understand something. The man who threatened your marriage is not the same man who taught me to ride a bicycle, who sold his last good watch to pay my WAEC fees when the transport business first started struggling, who used to cry, actually cry, during Sunday service whenever the choir sang certain songs. Fear does something to good men, Nonso. It does not make the bad thing they do less bad, but it explains why a man who spent his whole life protecting his family ended up hurting the very people he was trying to protect. I did not respond to him that night. I simply nodded and let him go. But I thought about those words for a long time afterward, turning them over the way you turn over a stone to see what is living underneath it. Sit with that for a moment. The villain of this story, the man demanding half my salary and threatening my marriage, was himself a man being slowly strangled by someone else's threat, a debt from 15 years ago that he had never confessed to his own wife, his own children, and the community that still called him chief with respect he no longer felt he deserved. But, and this is important, so do not misunderstand me, understanding why a man does something terrible does not erase the harm of the terrible thing he did. Chief Okoli had a choice. That first Sunday evening when he called me to his sitting room, he could have sat me down and told me the truth. My son, I am in trouble and I need your help. A man who says that is a man asking for support, and I would have helped him, gladly, the way any decent son-in-law would help a father drowning in an old mistake. Instead, he chose fear. He chose manipulation. He wrapped his desperation in a threat against my marriage because some deep, wounded part of him could not bear to be seen as weak or fallible in front of the young man who had just married his daughter. He would rather be feared than be pitied. And that choice, that specific choice, is what nearly cost him everything. Because secrets built on fear do not stay buried. They rot quietly underground until something forces them back into the light. Between the night Kelechi told us the full story and the day everything came out into the open, 3 months passed. 3 of the strangest, most tension-filled months of my entire life. Ijeoma and I debated endlessly what to do with the truth we now carried. Some nights, she wanted to confront her father immediately, privately, and demand a full accounting. Other nights, she wanted to say nothing at all, to simply stop me from sending any further payments and let her father figure out on his own why the money had stopped, forcing him to either come clean or invent a fresh lie. I, for my part, felt caught between 2 loyalties that had never before been in conflict. Loyalty to the wife I loved, who deserved the truth laid bare, and a strange, lingering respect for the broken old man in Suka, who, whatever his failures, had still welcomed me into his family with genuine warmth on the day we first met. During those 3 months, I quietly stopped sending money altogether, without any explanation to Chief Okoli. He called me twice. The first call, he asked almost gently whether something had happened with my finances. The second call, 2 weeks later, his voice had lost his earlier softness. There was an edge to it, something close to panic, though he tried to disguise it as mild irritation. I told him both times that I needed to reassess my financial obligations and would discuss it with him soon. I could hear in the silence that followed each of those calls a man who understood, perhaps for the first time, that his leverage was slipping and that whatever fragile arrangement had held for 8 months was beginning to unravel in ways he could not fully control. That something in our story was a wedding. Ijeoma's cousin was the one getting married, a woman named Chidiama that Ijeoma had grown up with almost like a sister, their mothers being close friends since childhood. It felt in some strange way poetically appropriate that the truth would surface at exactly this kind of gathering, because it was Chidiama's earlier failed marriage that Chief Okoli had once used as a veiled warning against me all those months ago in that small sitting room. Ijeoma pointed this out to me one evening as we prepared for the event, a bitter little smile on her face. She said, "He used her pain as a weapon against us. And now her joy is going to be the place where his lies finally end. There is something almost fair about that, don't you think?" Ijeoma's cousin, the very same cousin whose earlier marital scandal Chief Okoli had once used as a veiled threat against me, was getting married again, this time properly, a big traditional ceremony that would gather nearly the entire extended family and half the hometown under one large canopy. Chief Igwe, as it turned out, was invited too, being a respected elder in that same community, a man whose face everyone knew, even if most people did not know the private arrangement between Chief Okoli and Chief Igwe. Ijeoma and I discussed in the weeks before that wedding whether we should confront her father privately first, quietly, and give him a chance to come clean on his own terms. We decided against it. Ijeoma, in a decision I supported fully, chose instead to wait for the day the whole family would be gathered, because she said something to me that I will never forget. If my father was brave enough to threaten my marriage in private, he can be brave enough to face the truth in public. I am tired of protecting people who never protected me. The morning of the wedding, I remember, was unusually bright, the kind of clean, cloudless Nsukka morning that makes everything look freshly washed. Ijeoma wore a deep green Ankara gown that her mother had helped sew, and as she got dressed in front of the mirror in our hotel room, I noticed her hands were not steady. I asked her gently if she wanted to change her mind, if she wanted to speak to her father privately instead, one last time before doing this in front of everyone. She turned to face me, finished fastening her earring, and said, "Nonso, I have given him so many private moments to tell the truth. He has had 2 years. He chose silence every single time. I am done giving him private moments." I did not argue with her after that. I simply held her hand as we walked into the compound, where the canopies had already been arranged in tidy rows, caterers moving briskly between them with trays of jollof rice and grilled fish, a live band setting up near the raised platform where the couple would later be seated. The ceremony itself passed the way these ceremonies always do. The bride price negotiations conducted with exaggerated humor, elders speaking in proverbs that made the younger guests laugh without fully understanding them, Ijeoma glowing in her wrapper and coral beads as her new husband danced his way towards her, carrying a bottle of palm wine, searching the crowd for her bride in the traditional display of devotion. Chief Okoli sat prominently among the titled men, his chieftaincy cap set at its usual proud angle, laughing loudly at every joke, thumping the shoulders of the men beside him. Watching him from across the compound, so relaxed, so entirely himself, I felt something twist in my chest. Not quite anger, not quite pity, but some uncomfortable mixture of both, knowing what was coming and knowing he did not. On the day of the wedding, under a white canopy decorated with gold ribbons, with music playing and relatives dancing and spraying naira notes over the newlyweds, Ijeoma waited until the reception had settled into its natural lull, that quiet stretch after the main meal, when elders sit back in their chairs and young people begin to drift toward the dance floor. She stood up from our table, walked calmly to where her father sat among the other titled men, and asked loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, but not so loud that it seemed like a scene from a movie, "Papa, can you tell everyone here how much money Nonso has paid you every month for the past 2 years and why?" I want to describe that silence properly, because silence in a Nigerian gathering of 60 relatives is almost never total. There is usually a child crying somewhere, a plate clattering, someone's phone ringing with an old high-life tune as a ringtone. But in the seconds after Ijeoma asked her question, I swear the entire canopy seemed to hold its breath together. The band, mid-song, faltered and trailed off, the drummer apparently sensing something in the air before he could even see it. Aunties who had been gossiping 2 tables away craned their necks. Even the caterers, weaving between tables with trays balanced on their shoulders, slowed their steps. Ijeoma's voice had not been loud, but it had been clear, and clarity in a moment like that travels farther than volume ever could. The table went silent in that particular way. A room goes silent when everyone senses something important is happening but does not yet understand what. Chief Okoli's face drained of color. He glanced toward Chief Igwe, 3 seats away, and I watched something pass between the 2 men. An understanding, an old and tired understanding that the years of careful secrecy had finally run out. Chief Igwe, to his credit, did not deny anything when Ijeoma turned to address him directly and asked him plainly whether he was aware her husband had been sending money that eventually made its way, in part, towards settling her father's old cooperative debt. Chief Igwe, an old man himself, wary perhaps of carrying his own decade-long grudge, simply nodded and said, "Ask your father the full story, my daughter. I have only been collecting what is owed to me and to others." Chief Okoli tried for a moment to laugh it off. "Ijeoma, this is not the place," he said, glancing around at the watching faces, forcing a smile that did not reach his eyes. But Ijeoma did not sit down. She remained standing, arms folded, and said quietly but firmly, "You made it not the place 2 years ago, Papa, the day you called my husband to your sitting room and told him our marriage would not survive if he refused you. You made it not the place the day you let me believe you were a man of your word. I am simply asking you to finish the conversation you started here, where everyone can hear it, since you are so comfortable making the threat where no one could." Mama Ngozi, seated 2 chairs away, turned to her husband with a look I will never forget. Not anger yet, not even confusion, but the dawning, terrible realization of a woman beginning to understand that her entire marriage contained rooms she had never been permitted to enter. "Okoli," she said, so soft it was almost a whisper, "what are you talking about?" What followed was not a dramatic shouting match, the kind you might expect from a film. It was something quieter, and in its own way, far more painful. Chief Okoli, in front of nearly 60 relatives and neighbors, admitted the truth. He admitted diverting the cooperative funds 15 years earlier. He admitted the collapsed contract, the sold buses, the years of secret repayment, and yes, he admitted asking me for money under the shadow of a threat he never should have made. His voice shook as he spoke. He began slowly, almost inaudibly, recounting the collapse of the haulage contract 15 years earlier. The way his voice cracked slightly on the word greedy when he described his own decision to divert the cooperative fund without telling anyone. He described selling the first bus quietly, telling the family it had developed engine problems beyond repair. A lie Ijeoma and Kelechi had both believed without question at the time, being teenagers with no reason to doubt their father's word. He described the day Chief Igwe first confronted him in this same compound years before, pulling him aside during another wedding entirely, and the shame of that first confrontation being so total that he decided in that instant he would rather die than let his family discover what he had done. He did not look at me while he confessed the part about threatening my marriage. He looked at Ijeoma the entire time, as if the only forgiveness he was truly asking for was hers. "I told myself," he said, his voice barely above a whisper now, the entire canopy straining to hear him, "that I was protecting this family, that if the truth came out, no one would respect any of us again. Not you, not Kelechi, not your mother, not even the man you married. I convinced myself that money, quietly moved, quietly hidden, was messy. I did not understand until this moment, standing here in front of all of you, that I had simply replaced one kind of shame with a smaller shame, over and over for 15 years, until the smaller shames became a mountain I could no longer climb down from." He turned, finally, and looked at me directly, for the first time since Ijeoma had stood up. "Nonso, my son, I am sorry. You came into this family with an open hand, and I met you with a closed hand wrapped in kindness. That was wickedness, whatever name I gave it in my own head. I am sorry." Mama Ngozi did not speak again for the rest of that reception. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, staring at some point in the middle distance, and I understood watching her that her silence was not acceptance. It was the particular, exhausted silence of a woman recalculating 31 years of marriage in real time, wondering how many other rooms in her husband's mind she had never been shown. I will not pretend the aftermath was simple or immediately warm, because that would be a lie. And I promised you at the start of this story that it would not follow the boring, predictable pattern you might expect. Suffer, then get rich, then forgive, then everyone lives happily ever after. That is not what happened. The weeks immediately following that wedding were honestly some of the coldest weeks our extended family has ever lived through. Phone calls that used to be warm and easy between Ijeoma and her mother became short, functional, almost businesslike. Kelechi stopped visiting our flat as often, not out of anger at us, but out of what he later admitted was a kind of exhausted grief, watching his childhood home quietly come apart at the seams under the weight of a truth he himself had carried alone for 3 difficult years. Chief Okoli, for his part, did not attend church for nearly a month after the wedding, something my own mother, who heard about it through the ever-active grapevine of extended family gossip, called a man hiding from God's face because he could not yet bear his own. What happened was this. The cooperative members present at the wedding, many of them elderly men who had quietly written off their lost contributions years earlier out of sheer exhaustion, agreed, after a long and difficult conversation held 2 weeks later in the village hall, to restructure what remained of Chief Okoli's debt into a smaller, more manageable sum, given how much he had already repaid through Chief Igwe over the years, plus what I had unknowingly contributed. I attended that village hall meeting myself, standing quietly at the back near the doorway while nearly 30 members of Umuada Progressive Traders Union sat in a wide circle of plastic chairs, debating, sometimes heatedly, what justice should look like for a man who had wronged them 15 years earlier and was only now, publicly, admitting it. Some of the elder men were unforgiving, arguing that Chief Okoli should be formally expelled from the union and his name read out at the next General Assembly as a warning to future treasurers. Others, particularly the ones closest in age to Chief Okoli, who remembered him as a young man building his transport business from nothing, argued for mercy, pointing out that 15 years of secret, painful repayment was itself a kind of punishment few men would have had the discipline to endure. Chief Igwe, when finally asked to speak, said something that quieted the room. "I have hated this man in silence for 15 years, he said, and hatred carried in silence for that long becomes its own prison. I do not know if I forgive him yet, but I am tired of being his jailer. Let us close this account and let all of us go free." The union eventually voted, not unanimously but by clear majority, to accept a reduced final settlement payable over 18 months, with the understanding that Chief Okoli would step down permanently from ever holding a financial position within the union again. Kelechi, moved by his father's public shame and quiet desperation, took over primary responsibility for the remaining repayment schedule himself, using his oil company salary, which finally allowed me to stop sending a single naira. I remember the day he told me this, sitting across from me at a small restaurant in Enugu, stirring his drink slowly before he spoke. "I am not doing this to save Papa's reputation," he said. "I am doing it because I want to be able to look my own children in the eye one day and tell them that when our family's secret finally broke open, we chose to fix it honestly, instead of quietly the way it was broken." I did not know what to say to that, except to shake his hand, firmly, the way you shake the hand of a man who has just chosen deliberately to become better than the example he was given. Ijeoma cried when Kelechi told her the same thing later that week, not out of sadness, but out of something closer to relief. The particular relief of watching your younger sibling grow, almost overnight, into the kind of steady, honest person your family desperately needed all along, even before anyone knew they would be needed for exactly this. She told me afterward that watching her brother step forward the way he did was the first moment since the whole ordeal began that she felt something other than anger or grief when she thought about her family. She felt for the first time in months something close to hope, the quiet, cautious hope of a woman beginning to believe that the people she loved were capable of becoming better than the worst thing any of them had ever done. Chief Okoli lost something that day that no amount of money could restore quickly: the easy, automatic respect he had commanded in that community for decades. Some elders still greet him warmly. Others have grown noticeably distant, offering him only the minimum courtesies expected between neighbors, nothing more. He no longer sits at the front during village meetings the way he once did. I have watched him, on the 2 occasions I have accompanied Ijeoma to town hall gatherings since, quietly take a seat somewhere in the middle rows, among the ordinary members, a small but visible surrender of a status he once wore as easily as his chieftaincy cap. It has been a year and a half since that wedding, and he is slowly, painfully rebuilding trust, not through grand gestures, because grand gestures, I have come to learn, are usually just another form of the same performance that got him into trouble in the first place, but through small, consistent honesty, something he never practiced with any of us before. He started in the months after the wedding doing something none of us expected. He began attending every single cooperative meeting again, not as treasurer, not as a titled elder giving deference, but as an ordinary contributing member, sitting quietly, listening more than he spoke, paying his portion faithfully in view of everyone. Kelechi told me their father once stayed behind after a meeting to personally help stack the plastic chairs, something he would never have done in his years of pride. And one of the older women present remarked, loud enough for others to hear, "Look at Okole carrying chairs like a small boy." And rather than bristling at the comment the way the old Chief Okoli might have, he simply laughed and said, "A man has to start somewhere, Mama."
He apologized to me properly for the first time, about 4 months after the wedding, sitting in that same small sitting room with the same unevenly clicking ceiling fan, and this time there was no smile hiding behind his words. He asked me that day whether I thought Ijeoma would ever fully trust him again, and I told him honestly that I did not know. That trust rebuilt after a wound that deep does not arrive all at once, the way it is sometimes portrayed in films, with a single tearful hug erasing years of hurt. It arrives in installments, much like the debt he was still repaying, a little at a time, proving again and again, until eventually, if a man is patient and genuinely changed, the weight of it becomes bearable again. He nodded slowly when I told him that, and said, "Then I will keep paying that debt to Nonso, for as long as it takes." It was the first time since I had known him that I believed completely that he meant every word. Before I left his sitting room that afternoon, he asked me one more question, one that surprised me with how much it revealed about how far he had genuinely traveled since that first Sunday evening when he had smiled and named a figure that nearly broke my marriage before it had properly begun. He asked whether I would consider someday sitting with him and Kelechi to review the union's finances together, not because he doubted his son's honesty, but because he said he never again wanted a single naira of family money to move through hands that only one person could see. "I want everything in the light now, Nonso," he said, "even the boring parts, even the parts nobody wants to check twice. I have learned at great cost what darkness does to a family, even when the man hiding in it believes he is protecting everyone inside." I agreed, and today, once every few months, the three of us sit together over a simple spreadsheet, checking figures that do not need checking, simply because an old man finally understands that trust is not a feeling you declare once. It is a practice you repeat patiently for as long as you are given breath to repeat it. Just an old man finally telling the truth, finally afraid of nothing except losing the family he had almost destroyed trying to protect. I have to tell you honestly that Ijeoma and I did not simply glide back into normal married life after that wedding either, because the truth of what I had hidden from her, 8 months of secret payments before she ever found that letter, sat between us for a long time, like a piece of furniture neither of us wanted to move, but both of us kept bumping into. She was not only angry at her father. For a period of about 6 weeks after Chidema's wedding, she was quietly, carefully angry at me too. And she told me so plainly one night, in the same calm, controlled voice she had used to confront her father in front of 60 relatives. "You let me believe we were struggling because of ordinary life, Nonso," she said. "You let me think I was imagining things when I noticed you exhausted every weekend. You made decisions about our marriage without me, the same way my father made decisions about his marriage without my mother. Do you understand how that felt, finding that out?" I did understand eventually, though it took me longer than it should have to fully sit with it. I had told myself during those 8 secret months that I was protecting her, shielding her from stress and fear the way a good husband should. But protecting someone by deciding unilaterally what truths they are allowed to carry is not really protection. It is a smaller, gentler version of exactly what her father had done, deciding out of what felt like love that silence was safer than honesty. We spent several long evenings that season talking this through properly, sometimes tensely, sometimes in tears, slowly rebuilding an understanding between us that a marriage cannot survive two people quietly managing each other's burdens in secret, however good the intentions behind it. We made an agreement then, one we still keep today, that no financial decision affecting our household, no matter how small it might seem, would ever again be made or hidden by one of us alone. Mama Ngozi's healing, I should tell you, took the longest of anyone's either. For nearly a year after the wedding, she and Chief Okoli slept, by her own quiet admission to Ijeoma, in what she called the same bed but different marriages, a phrase that stayed with me long after I first heard it, because I understood exactly what she meant without needing further explanation. She was not a woman prone to dramatic gestures either. No packing of bags, no threat of separation, nothing the neighbors could gossip about. Her wound expressed itself instead in small withdrawals, cooking his favorite dishes less often than she once did, attending church women's fellowship meetings that ran later and later into the evening, as though she preferred for a season to be anywhere that was not alone with him. Ijeoma worried during those months that her parents' marriage might quietly end, not through divorce, but through a slow, silent drifting apart that neither of them would ever formally acknowledge. What eventually began to soften Mama Ngozi, according to Ijeoma, was not any single dramatic apology from her husband, but the accumulation of small, boring, unremarkable honesty over many months. Chief Okoli showing his cooperative repayment receipts without being asked, mentioning offhandedly at dinner when Chief Igwe had called about the schedule, no longer excusing himself mysteriously to take phone calls in the backyard the way he once had. Trust, I have learned from watching that couple, is rebuilt less through grand declarations and more through the tedious, unremarkable accumulation of 1,000 small transparencies, until one day, without either party quite noticing the exact moment it happened, the distance has quietly closed the game. Mama Ngozi and Chief Okoli attended their granddaughter's dedication ceremony together last December, sitting shoulder to shoulder, and though I cannot claim to know everything that passes between two people who have shared a marriage for over 30 decades, I noticed for the first time in a long while that she let her hand rest on his arm during the prayer, an ordinary, unremarkable gesture that meant, to anyone who had watched the two of them over the previous year, absolutely everything. Ijeoma and I are still married, still building the life we started that day at her cousin's first wedding all those years ago, the one where I could not stop staring at her laugh. Our marriage did not survive because her father failed to destroy it. Our marriage survived because in the end, we chose to stop protecting secrets and started protecting each other instead. That, I have come to believe, is the real difference between a family that heals and a family that quietly rots from the inside. Not the absence of shameful mistakes, because every family has them, but the courage eventually to drag them into the light. I think often these days about the version of this story I almost lived. The version where Ijeoma never finds that letter tucked inside a forgotten Ghana must go bag, where I keep sending 250,000 naira every month for years, without ever understanding why. Where the resentment quietly hardens into something neither of us can name. Until one day, perhaps 5 or 10 years down the line, our own marriage becomes the cautionary tale some other young husband is warned about at some other family gathering. That version was entirely possible. It was in fact the version we were living, right up until an old woman asked her daughter to help her sort fabric for a church bazaar. I do not know what to call that, luck, providence, the ordinary randomness of life, except to say that I no longer take for granted how easily the truth could have stayed buried, and how much of our happiness today depends on the fact that it did not. I also think often about Chief Igwe, the man who was technically the one holding the threat over my father-in-law's head for 15 years, and yet who never once, in all that time, exposed him publicly, choosing instead
the slower, quieter, arguably crueler path of private repayment. I asked him once at a family function nearly a year after that wedding why he had chosen silence instead of simply reporting Chief Okoli to the union immediately all those years ago. He thought about the question for a long moment before answering. Because exposure destroys a man completely all at once, he said, and I did not want to destroy my friend. I only wanted him to feel every month exactly what he had taken from me. I did not realize until your wife stood up at that wedding that I had built my own kind of prison in the process, one where neither of us could ever truly be free until someone braver than both of us forced the door open. There is a strange kind of wisdom in that admission, the recognition that even a wronged man, seeking what feels like fair repayment, can become trapped by his own quiet vengeance if it goes on long enough without resolution. I have not forgotten either how close I came to becoming a bitter man myself during those 2 years, a man who might have carried quiet resentment into every family gathering for the rest of his life, smiling at Chief Okoli across the table while privately counting in his head every naira that had been taken from him under threat. I am grateful I did not become that man, not because forgiveness was easy, but because I watched up close what 15 years of unspoken resentment had done to Chief Okoli and Chief Igwe both, 2 men who had once been close as brothers, reduced to a decade and a half of careful avoidance, private payments, and buried shame, all because neither of them found the courage early enough to simply speak the truth out loud to the people who deserve to hear it. Sometimes I ask myself what would have happened if Ijeoma had simply put that letter back into the Ghana Must Go bag that afternoon and said nothing. I think about the version of Chief Okoli who would have continued smiling at family gatherings while quietly bleeding both of us for years to come. The version of Mama Ngozi who might have died one day never knowing the full truth of the man she married. The version of Kelechi who would have carried a secret alone into his own future marriage, teaching himself without meaning to that silence is simply what love in our family looks like. I am grateful every single day that we did not become that family. I am grateful that my wife was brave enough to stand up in front of 60 relatives and ask one simple, terrifying question, because that question did not just save our marriage, it saved her parents' marriage too, and it may very well save whatever marriage her own children build one day, because they will grow up watching a family that finally chose honesty over comfortable silence. If this story moved you even a little, subscribe to this channel and stay till the next one, because I promise you, the stories only get heavier from here, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. And if you have ever carried a secret inside your own marriage, the kind you have convinced yourself is protecting the people you love, I want you to ask yourself the question my wife's courage taught me to ask myself that year. Are you truly protecting them, or are you simply postponing the day the truth finally arrives on its own terms in front of an audience you never chose? Thank you for listening all the way to the end.